Hello there, my name is Cara Barrett and I'm an ACCA expert tutor in SBR. And of course, as you can see, this particular video is going to deal with question number 2, which was called agua fresca. So let's start with an overview of the question. This is our landing screen from the practice platform, and we're given that little bit of background information about the company. Agua Fresca provides environmentally sustainable premium water filtration systems under lease agreements. Senior management team is assessed on a number of metrics, including operating profit adjusted for non-recurring items. So, of course, question 2 is our ethics question. We are very used to seeing references to how management are assessed on their performance in this type of question. We're also told the financial year end is the 30th of June 20XD1, and then we have 3 exhibits. The first one deals with filtration systems, so a particular lease agreement with a hotel group. The second deals with credit losses and how they are accounted for. And the third one describes the chief accountant's concerns about the draft sustainability report. In terms of the requirements, we have a Part A, a Part B, but in total there are 4 requirements. There are, of course, 2 professional marks attached, in this case to Part B, because there are always 2 professional marks attached to the ethics question. This is a 20 marker, and of course if we work on the basis that of your 3 hours 15 minutes will be pretty much lost in looking at questions, then we should be allocating 1.8 minutes to each mark, so that's a 36-minute block of time allocated to this particular question, split across the requirements as shown. As ever, really important to stick to that and move on when your time is up. The other thing to point out is that the requirements correspond quite neatly to the exhibits, although they're not specifically identified like they were in question 1 within the requirement. So Part A refers to leases with a hotel group, so that is Exhibit 1 content. Part A2 refers to credit losses, that relates to Exhibit 2. Requirement A3 refers to sustainability reporting, which relates to Exhibit 3, and of course the ethics requirement, as usual, covers all material, relates to all material within the question. So let's go into the practice platform now and think in a little bit more detail about each requirement. Well, if we start with Part A1, discuss how Agua Fresca should have accounted for the lease of the filtration system to the hotel group. Let's just open the exhibit and see what's there. And you are given a bit of background here in the first paragraph really about the importance of sustainability and how Agua Fresca really wants to capitalise on the move towards that. However, the detail of the lease really comes in the second paragraph. And the terms and conditions of each agreement vary depending on the customer, but you are given details of a new lease entered into on the 1st of March XD1 with a hotel group. It's 5 years long, and after that the hotel group can buy the filtration system for a fixed price, expected to be about 15% of fair value at that date at the end of the lease term. The useful life of such a system is 8 years, and the terms of the contract require the payment of $600,000 per annum in advance. The FD, who is a member of ACCA, has instructed the new chief accountant, also a member of ACCA, to recognise the $600,000 as operating income in the year ended 30th of June 20XD1. So, how should you go about approaching that particular requirement? I'm just going to close down the detail now that we've seen it. Let's just start by thinking about a really practical point. You do need to signpost your answer for your marker. So a really good way to do that is to copy and then paste your requirements into your word processor document. So that gives you the question to look back at. That means we can now close the requirements box, remove the clutter, but it also signposts your working, signposts your answer for your marker. So what should you be covering here? Well, remember there are 5 marks here, so we're looking for 5 good points. And a really good thing to do, even for only a 5 marker, is to first of all just think, how should I actually structure my answer? So how should Agua Fresca have accounted for the lease? We know, we've read the background, that Agua Fresca is the lessor. So in terms of structuring my answer, I think you should be thinking about addressing the lease classification first of all, so operating or finance. And then on the back of that, thinking about the actual accounting. And because we're in the ethics question, because we've been presented with the accounting they're actually intending to apply, part of the answer there should be considering whether the suggested accounting is correct, and if not, what it should be. Now, in terms of the content, so having got that skeleton in place, I'm going to flesh out the content under each of my bold bullet pointed headings. I would leave those as headings for the purposes of signposting the marker. But if I scroll down again, you'll see the kind of thing that I would think about writing here. So I'd start under lease classification with a really simple IFRS 16 says that leases are classified as operating or finance. So you're setting the scene. And then I would go back to the approach we talk about quite a lot, which is to state the requirements of the standard and then apply to the scenario. This is something the examiner is really keen on. So the stating is providing, in effect, the backup for what you're suggesting, but it's no good just regurgitating what the standard says. You have to be very, very specific to the scenario. That's the application. So in this case, I've written this out as I might do in an exam scenario. State, and I wouldn't write that heading by the way, but state a finance lease is a lease in which the risks and rewards of ownership are substantially transferred to the lessee. IFRS 16 includes specific indicators that a lease is a finance lease, including transfer of ownership at the end of the lease term, or the existence of a purchase option that's reasonably certain to be exercised because option price is less than fair value. So what I've done there, in effect, is I've paraphrased the standard, but bearing in mind the number of marks available, I'm not going to paraphrase absolutely everything I remember from the standard, just the relevant parts. I'm now going to apply to the scenario. So the agreement between Agua Fresca and the customer is for 5 years. The system has a useful life of 8 years. So this is inconclusive, really, in terms of risks and rewards. However, the agreement does allow the customer to purchase the system at such a low price, that's 15% of fair value at the end of the lease, that it's reasonably certain that the option will be exercised. And that means, of course, we can conclude this is a finance lease. So quite short, sharp points there. I would leave the white space as I have done here. I'm making it really easy for my marker to read. Now I'll move on to the second part of my answer, which is where I'm going to explain the lessor accounting, but in the context of what we already know about the suggested accounting. So the FD has suggested, we know this from the scenario, that $600,000 received on the 1st of March XD1 as an annual payment in advance is recognised as income in the year ended 30th of June XD1. The recognition of rental amounts as income is only appropriate for operating leases, and in this case income would actually be recognised on an accrual basis, not a cash basis. So we've said what's been suggested, and now we've in effect debunked it. We've said it's not appropriate. So now let's state what's correct, and again I wouldn't have the heading suggested and correct, that's just to show you what I'm doing here. As this is a finance lease, Agua Fresca should de-recognise the asset in its own financial statements and instead recognise a lease receivable amount. Now, that's sufficient. The bit I've got in brackets here is a higher value point. It's kind of your extra marks, your prize winner points. The receivable amount should include the purchase option price since it's reasonably certain to be exercised. So I've put that there almost as a learning thing. If you didn't write that, really, that's no big deal. But moving on, what then happens, having recognised this lease receivable, is that the balance decreases with amounts received from the customer and increases as interest accrues to the balance. But let's not forget the impact on profit or loss as well, because that interest is recognised as finance income in profit or loss. So again, some short, sharp points there. I've laid them out with white space. I can look back at my answer and I can clearly see that I have actually probably more than 5 points made there. And I'm looking for 5 good points to score full marks, which of course you don't need in any case. Let's think about the second requirement, which was credit losses. Well, looking at the requirement, 4 marks were going here for explaining why the treatment of credit losses is wrong, including explanation of the correct treatment. So let's have a look at Exhibit 2 to see exactly what is going on. And as you can see here, nature of the hospitality industry that each year proportion of customers cease to trade, FD has indicated to the chief accountant that a balance due to the company should only be written off to P&L when it's absolutely certain no money can be recovered, and in this situation, the resulting credit losses should be presented as a non-recurring exceptional item in the statement of profit or loss. So, what might you write here? How might you structure this? Well, first of all, rather than copy and paste my requirement across here, I've just shown a different way of approaching this really. You can very quickly jot down just a heading that's relevant to the topic. You are still signposting your marker. It still says A2. I am still saying which requirement I'm answering. So credit losses, and then what would I do here? How would I structure my answer? What's my skeleton? Well, driven by the requirement, I would first of all address why the treatment suggested is incorrect, and then what the correct treatment should be. There are 4 marks available, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to say a couple of marks for each. If we then flesh out those points, if I scroll down, and I have not here written this as I would in the actual exam, I just want to give you the idea of what I would expect you to write. Why is the treatment incorrect? I think there are 2 things that have been suggested which are wrong. And in both cases, it's good practice to state what's wrong, but why. So state the requirements of the standard and then in effect apply to the scenario by saying that's not what's being done. So first of all, the first thing that's wrong, IFRS 9 specifically requires us to use a forward-looking or an expected loss model for credit losses. However, the FD is suggesting an incurred loss model, so only recognise credit losses when they've actually happened. That's completely against what IFRS 9 says. And secondly, the FD is suggesting that the losses should be recognised as non-recurring exceptional items. Well, IAS 1 does not address recurring or non-recurring items at all. So applying that to the scenario, IAS 1 hasn't prohibited presentation of these credit losses as non-recurring, but actually, if you think about the situation, to do so would really not faithfully represent what's going on, because we know that a small number of customers go under and cannot pay every year. Then move on to talk about the correct treatment, and basically there you are going to be thinking about what IFRS 9 says on credit losses, particularly in relation to receivables here. So of course you can refer to that very simplified matrix model that is allowed for receivables. Now, thinking about the number of marks going, you are not going to be giving very much detail here at all. What's probably more important is the apply section, in which you're saying in effect what Agua Fresca themselves should do. They should look at their customers, look at the portfolio, maybe classify them according to amounts outstanding and time they've been outstanding, and on the basis of that determine how many customers are expected to default on some or all amounts owed, and then recognise a loss allowance for that amount. And that, of course, is recognised in profit or loss as an operating expense. So for 4 marks, we need 4 good points there. And actually, I don't think that was too tricky, certainly to achieve a pass, if not the majority of the 4 marks. Let's move on to requirement A3. Well, this was a really short requirement, just 3 marks to discuss the importance of effective sustainability reporting for Agua Fresca. And initially it appears that Exhibit 3 is the relevant exhibit. However, when you open that, it actually tells us about the existing sustainability report and the fact that the chief accountant thinks it includes assertions which are incorrect. So, although that's useful information for the ethics requirement, it's not really relevant here to discuss the importance of effective sustainability reporting for Agua Fresca. What's probably more important here is information that we've already seen. So, for example, within the introductory section, what does Agua Fresca do? Provides environmentally sustainable premium water filtration systems. So that's obviously the focus of its business, being environmentally friendly. Within Exhibit 1, in the first paragraph here, we were told about Agua Fresca planning to capitalise on the continuing move towards sustainability and seeking investment for further growth. So the clues for the answer here come from elsewhere in the scenario, not from Exhibit 3, which initially appears to be the relevant exhibit. So for just 3 marks, what should your answer include? Well, if I scroll down again, we have got the signposting there for your marker, and that could be the copy and paste from the requirement. And what I've done here really is I've just listed a few points. I think if you read the answer here, it's got some great points in it in terms of the importance of effective sustainability reporting, but I just want to make some points as to your answer. The first one there, ATQ, answer the question. I think it's all too easy with this question to decide what it's really asking is what is sustainability reporting, or what should Agua Fresca include in its sustainability report. That's not what the question's asking at all. You must address the question. You must answer the question. So why is effective sustainability reporting important to Agua Fresca? It's also really important to be very specific to Agua Fresca itself, not just generic points about the importance of sustainability reporting. So in other words, my final point there, what benefits will effective reporting bring for Agua Fresca? And we're looking for 3. For 3 marks, we need 3 good points. So things such as, if we just go back to Exhibit 1, the company expects to seek new investment for further growth. So in order to achieve investment from parties that are interested in green investments, in sustainable investments, our company is going to have to prepare a good, informative sustainability report, for example. So that's one reason, that's one element of the importance of effective sustainability reporting, gaining the investment. The company also wants to capitalize on this move towards sustainability. In other words, it wants to gain customers. That's effectively what's being said there. It wants to gain market share. So again, if our customers, if the potential customers are looking at environmentally friendly filtration systems, it suggests that they do have a sustainability agenda. And so they are going to want to ensure that Agua Fresca itself operates sustainably. So that's another reason why good reporting is important. There are, of course, other reasons. That's 2 good reasons. There are, of course, other reasons apart from attracting new investment and attracting new customers. There is, for example, allowing Agua Fresca, which is essentially a green company. It has green operations, it has green objectives, obviously, so allowing it to monitor its own progress towards those environmental and social goals. There's also potentially the importance of attracting employees to the company, developing new systems, developing the future of the company, and so on, developing the brand, improving and enhancing the brand. So just be very careful with that requirement, how you answer, making sure that you do answer the question, think about the scenario. But as I say, have a look at the answer, read through the model answer because it's got some good points in it. Our final requirement was the ethics requirement. Identify and discuss the ethical issues arising from the scenario, which the new chief accountant should consider, and what actions he should take as a consequence. And of course, you had 6 marks available, plus the extra 2 for professional marks. So in terms of your answer to that particular requirement, if I just scroll down, I think there's 2 prongs to it. First of all, what are the ethical issues? And secondly, what actions should be taken? And we see this kind of requirement quite a bit, and it's always the case that the marks are in favour of the actual ethical issues. So what could you include in order to access those 6 content marks? Well, if I just scroll down, under the heading of ethical issues, the first thing I've got there is an introduction. That's actually to access your professional marks rather than your content marks. I'll come back to that. But in terms of the content marks, you need to make sure that you are stating the ethical issues. So that really is our first bullet point there, the incorrect accounting treatments. That's the lease and the credit losses. And then my 4th bullet point there, the incorrect assertions in the sustainability report. In each case, you need to make sure that you are identifying and explaining the ethical principles that are breached. So you're going to be talking about integrity in particular, objectivity, because our FD is rewarded, of course, based on operating profit adjusted for non-recurring items, and so is trying to recognize or suggest that we recognize items as non-recurring. But you could also, of course, refer to professional competence there and whether the FD is up to date with IFRS standards and indeed the requirements of sustainability reports. When you're dealing with ethical issues as well, it's good practice to think about any threats. And in this case in particular, I think you could refer, as we've already suggested, to a self-interest threat in terms of the FD, with the FD focusing on his personal gain rather than the company. But you could also refer to an intimidation threat, potentially in terms of that new chief accountant. It's really easy to miss, but in Exhibit 1 here, we are specifically told that the chief accountant is new. So new to position might mean open to intimidation. In terms of the actions to take, if I just scroll down, again in italics there I've got be realistic. That's really relevant to professional marks. But in terms of the content, we're looking for things such as discuss. The chief accountant should discuss the issues with the FD, should encourage amendments to be made in accordance with IFRS standards. If necessary, should take the issue higher, potentially to the other directors on the board of Agua Fresca, possibly to an external auditor. Let's just finish by thinking about professional marks. So here are my top tips for earning professional marks, and these top tips are relevant not only to question 2 but also the section B question that has 2 professional marks attached. First of all, you're really going to help yourself achieve them if you plan the format and structure of your answer. And of course that is going to include using headings, so subheadings to signpost your answer. Think about adding an introduction to set the scene, as we've just seen in that particular question, and then make sure your discussion is logical. Any explanations, any conclusions should be really clear, and any advice given, so including actions to take, as we've just seen, must be relevant. If it's relevant to the question, provide a conclusion, and again, if relevant to the question, make sure that you focus on any identified audience using the correct tone and terminology. But overall, take a step back and think, how would I write this if I was writing this in my workplace? Well, that's the end of our second debrief video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll be joining me for numbers 3 and 4.